Good afternoon. It's good day, everyone. Very happy to sit here with you, Pandu.
I'm totally thrilled to sit here with you and with everyone here.
And we have a complicated issue to talk about, right? This issue's been a complicated matter for many hundreds of years, even before we had Google. There is, for instance, this Mark Twain quoting British Premier Disraeli saying that Disraeli once said there are three kinds of lies. There are lies, there are bad lies, damn lies, and there are statistics. And that quote itself is a lie. Mark Twain put it in his autobiography, but it never happened. Disraeli never said that. And still, this quote is very much spread around the world. Many people use it. Sometimes they attribute it to different people, so you need to do your research to understand who did it, who said that, did it happen at all. And this shows a bit of the dilemma that we are right now having. We have access to information in a way that we never had before. And platforms aggregating the information of the world have become sort of infrastructure for individuals to exercise human rights, such as freedom of information and freedom of opinion. And when it comes to political information, then suddenly things become difficult because they sort of are entangled between facts and truthfulness on the one side. The truth within politics, there are some facts in politics as well. And there's the other dimension, opinion. And opinion is not necessarily connected to facts. Many politicians lied during their campaign, and that's fine. We wouldn't call that disinformation, misinformation. So the actors weighing and moderating between those two fundamental rights become crucial actors in democracies. And until now, we only had governments and press within that position being able to moderate and to contextualize. Suddenly, Google has become one of these actors. And of course, there are a lot of myths around how Google works on the one side. And there are also many open questions, not also with regards to the technological part, but also with regards to the ethical part. What criteria are you using? So I'm really happy that we have you here, because you are the person as the Vice President of Search that is able probably to respond many of the questions that I have. Just a short introduction, because I think Pandu is really impressive. He's been working at Google for almost 13 years, but you are also a professor in Stanford, teaching information retrieval. And prior to that, you were by two different companies, well, one company called Stratify, but before that, you were at the NASA. And at the NASA, you were the deputy lead of the Remote Agent Project, which is a very impressive project with one of the first bots being run. It was the first artificial intelligence system to be given primary command of spacecraft. So you know how bots work, you know how semantics and information retrieval in the internet works, and from many different perspectives. So when it comes to Google, you haven't been the 20 years that Google is right now celebrating. Google is this year becoming 20 years old. You've been 13 working for Google. So I guess you have a pretty good oversight of what has happened across all these years. So part of the initial search criteria and algorithms that have either been used in Google or are still being used, they are probably not there anymore. In 2016, you announced publicly that you had performed over 1,600 changes in Google search. If you would look at Google as it were a house and it started being a cabin in the woods, in a garage, would you say that the plan has fundamentally changed? Does it look pretty different now?
So that's a great question. But before I do that, thank you for that introduction, and thank you all for attending. So you raise a really great question. Google's been around for 20 years, and have things really changed, or are they really the same as before? And with all such questions, the answer is yes and no, right? There are some things, some fundamental principles, if you will, foundational principles that have not changed. They've been around for us for pretty much since the founding of the company, right? And there are two of them that are particularly worth highlighting. The first is focus on the user. This is a very strongly held belief within the company, and particularly with search, is if you build search, if you build your products, but more specifically search, for your users, with that being the primary goal, then all else follows. So what that means is that things like a commercial or an ad focus does not enter into the search criteria. There's a wall between the search side and the ad side. We never sell search results, for example, right? None of those things, because all of these things detract from the focus on the user. This was what the principle was at the beginning, and it continues to be the principle. So that's one principle that we've had. The second foundational principle that we've had is that great search results happen when you show results that are relevant to your search query, but are from authoritative sources whenever possible. So this combination of relevance and authority is what really separated Google from other search engines at the time when it first came out. And this principle has stayed true through the test of, has held through the test of time, and has continued to be important even today as we deal with misinformation. So at sort of a foundational level, it's very much the same. But having said that, of course, in 20 years, lots has changed, right? It's changed on the scale, it's changed on infrastructure, it's changed on access, it's changed on technology. So for example, when Google first, or not even Google, when the web first came out, the first search engines, which was Yahoo, it was just a directory, right? A directory of all the sites. So it was really tiny. Compare that to today, where there are trillions of pages on the web, right? So completely different infrastructure is needed to handle the scale, the increase that has happened in the years. Even in terms of that infrastructure, in the early days, they used to build an index of the web at the time, which stayed that way for about a month. So you built an index for a month, and during the month, you served that one index, and then you built another one. And so you can imagine that pages that were created during that month were just sort of missing from the index. Compare that to today, when there are pages on sort of important sites, fresh sites, that get into the index within seconds of being put on the website. So the freshness of it has, and the corresponding infrastructure has changed dramatically. Think about access. In the early days, access to Google and the web was through desktop computers. Today, smartphones are everywhere, right? And that's a dramatic change, because it has made people have access to information in the moment that they have the question. You don't have to go home or to your work to a desktop to do it. So that changes the kind of question. The form factor is different, so the interfaces have to be different. The kinds of questions people ask are different. And so there are fundamental changes that have happened because of these form factor changes. And then finally, on technology, there have been huge changes. Early on, the primary technology was that of information retrieval, things that had been pioneered in academia and so forth, and then continued on. But over the last several years, we've introduced this notion of a knowledge graph, which is a semantic model of entities and relations in the world. And that has allowed us to build much more compelling user experiences. And today, you see the dramatic increase of deep learning algorithms. And these promise to completely transform what we can do with things like language understanding, something that is absolutely key to Google. So in summary, I think the fundamental principles haven't changed, but pretty much everything else has changed.
Okay, so what you're saying is that for instance, you change or you separated Google advertisements from Google search so that you can concentrate on usability and understanding what user behavior makes the algorithm work better, and what type of understanding from user behavior can be used then to optimize your algorithm. Are those two different structures somehow interrelated? I mean, are you using the same algorithms for both structures?
For search and ads?
Yeah.
No, the algorithms are actually very different because the problems are very different, right? In search, you're really looking to rank web pages to satisfy user intents, whereas on the ad side, they're looking to target ads produced by advertisers against the query. And the problems are different in various ways. In ads, for example, there are bids that are made, and there's a complicated auction that they run to decide what ads to show. We have none of that in search itself. So they are very different in terms of the problems that they're solving. Some of the very underlying technologies, of course, are the same because you still need the same kinds of technologies for scale and so forth. But the problems are very different, and they're just run by completely different teams. So
when it comes to search, what are the most important factors to rank #1? I guess it's more than 1, 2, 3, 4, many, many more. Well, I don't guess I know. However, I would like perhaps to give us a few examples, because of course you talk about relevance. What does that mean? Relevance is a very political term, and it implies an ethical decision, right?
So this is a great question, which I think lots of people are interested in, not the least of which are webmasters who want to rank effectively in search. And there's a variety of answers that I can give you. I mean, at the sort of the highest level, our goal is to take great websites and rank them effectively, right? And so our recommendation to site owners is build a great website for your users. Don't worry about figuring out how to target or to manipulate Google search in any way. You want to be able to serve your users, because if you serve your users, we will find a way to make you successful. Whereas if you try to manipulate search, we don't like that, right? And so the message to everyone is make sure you focus on your users and build a great service, a great website for your users. That's sort of at the highest level. Now, you're probably not satisfied with that answer, so let me tell you a little bit more. We use a variety of different factors or features or signals, we call them various different things, to actually produce the ranking that you find. And these range from document-specific signals to user-specific signals. So for example, on the document-specific side, we actually look at all the words on the page. We look at the structure of the page, things like the title of the page, because that gives us information as to what's on the page. Another very important signal is the linkage between pages, the links and the link text that's there. That proves to be incredibly valuable. There are things like when the page was created, freshness turns out to be a very important criterion for many searches. If you're searching for a score of yesterday's game, you don't want a page that was created 20 years ago, right, about the same teams. That's just not what you're looking for. So freshness tends to be a very important criterion that needs to happen. And so there's a variety of sort of page-specific signals that we use here. But there are also sort of user-specific signals. One of the most important user-specific signals is the location of the user. Where is the user located, right? So where the user is located tells you what is the language that the user is likely to be comfortable in, so we can get them results in the language that they're comfortable with. It tells us which country they are in, so we can make sure that we give you results from your country, so it looks to you like it's a local search engine that services your needs. If you know which city you're in and you search for a zoo, then we show you the zoo in your city rather than the zoo in the world-famous zoo in San Diego, right? So there's all kinds of things where the location of the user becomes important. So these are just sort of a smattering of factors. We have several hundred factors that go into it, but what they're really about is understanding language, right? And so we do a lot of processing to develop language understanding techniques, and those sort of feed into this. And then one final point to be made on this is whenever we launch changes, we always have a very effective evaluation process, right? To make sure that changes are actually good for users. And as part of that evaluation process, we do these so-called side-by-side experiments, right? Mm-hmm. So the idea is somebody comes to you with this change, and they say, this is a wonderful change. You say, OK, let's verify that it is indeed as wonderful as you say it is. And so we go off and we sample a whole bunch of queries where your change actually makes a meaningful difference, maybe several hundred, maybe several thousand queries, right? And then we put side by side the results for each of those queries. On one side will be whatever Google has today, call it the base or the control or the production side of the side-by-side. And on the other side, you put the experiment side, that is, with your change, what would it look like, right? And now you have these two side-by-side, the side-by-side experiments, and you ask raters, these are people that we pay to do this task, we ask them, which side is better, right? And when we ask them which side is better, sometimes they say the experiment side is better, sometimes they say the base side is better, and that gives us a sense for, in aggregate, whether a particular change is good or not. A good change will have significantly more experiment side goods than the base side goods, and then we launch those changes. To help the raters make this judgment, we put out a set of rater guidelines. And these rater guidelines, it's a 160-page document that essentially says what is great search. Right? It's our best description of what it means to have great search. This is, and the raters are tested on this before they can do ratings. While they're doing ratings, we have blind tests to make sure they're consistently applying these rater guidelines. And if you want to know what Google is trying to do with search, the rater guidelines are what you look for. Right? And these rater guidelines, this is a public document. You can search on Google for them. It should be the top result for an appropriate query. But it's a public document that is sort of a key part of the transparency of how search works. And I would encourage you to go take a look at that. And in addition to this, we have everything I've said and more is available on a How Search Works site, and we provide various services to webmasters and things. But this is the key set of ideas, the rater guidelines, the focus on the user, and then a smattering of the different signals that we use.
How often do you review those greater search guidelines, and who is behind that?
How often do we?
Yeah. How much do you review the search guidelines, 160 pages document?
Yeah, so this is the guidelines don't change very often because it's a lot of work and there's a lot of thought that goes in. There's a big cross-functional team that works on these guidelines and makes sure there's a lot of debate and discussion because, I mean, at the end of the day, this is like a product requirements document, right? That's sort of what it is. It's like, this is what people are trying to build. This is the great search they're trying to build. Search today isn't exactly that because our algorithms are not good enough to fully capture everything that we wanted to capture. But this is our goal. And so there's a cross-functional team from various different disciplines within the company that puts this together. And every time there's any sort of significant changes that need to be made, we make them. But it's not something that changes on a regular basis.
Do you have an ethicist in the team? Also, OK, you have one.
So we have people on the team with a variety of different backgrounds. It's not just engineers on the team, but we work closely with policy and legal. We work with user experience folks, and we work with privacy folks. These are all sort of important areas that we work in. And in this team, we have all kinds of background, including people with ethics background and so forth. So these are sort of very important discussions that we have amongst ourselves and amongst the team, because this is what sort of guides how search is developed, and we want search to be great for all our users.
So, if I hear you right, one of the things, or one of the conclusions one might draw, is that actually the criteria you're using are very usable, are very, I mean, Google is a brand for, and has a name for its usability in many of the products. So this is, of course, great, but on the other side, it sort of indicates that there is a sort of centralization of contents, because the more you try to be usable for the majority, the more you tend to mainstream content. There is content that is not problematic. If there is a mainstream towards that, I mean, it makes sense to understand where the person is located when someone searches for football, because, of course, if you are in England, you're going to search for a different concept as if you are in the US, right? But it's slightly different when it comes, for instance, to political content. Then it might become problematic. What about the minorities? So what about divergent opinions that might have a very small percentage? How are you dealing with that?
So we have, I have two responses to this, this question. One is diversity in our search results is actually centrally important to us. It turns out that a diverse set of search results actually are better for users. Right? Users actually like it when we show a diverse set of results, and we have evidence to show for that. Right? If there are queries without diversity, you can see that people are not happy, right? Because they're looking for other things. So it is very much in our interest to surface a diverse set of results whenever possible. Right? It's also in our interest to have a very diverse and rich web. Google is very much tied to the success of the open web, right? Google's and so we are very motivated to make the open web as successful as possible, and a diversity of opinion on the web is sort of a key part of it. Another point to be made is that the search interface, as it stands today, is fundamentally suited to showing a diversity of results. We don't just show you one result, we show you 10 results. You can go to the next page and so forth. And so there's lots of opportunity, and we definitely see users use that capability to find the kind of information that they're looking for. And finally, it's worth noting that the scale of queries is mind-boggling. Right? We get billions of queries a day. Yeah. Right? And a remarkable fact is 15% of queries we get every day are new queries that we've never seen before. Right? So there's a bewildering array of interests and curiosities that people have, which means that if someone comes and issues say a very general query, and they see that the results there don't quite suit their need, they immediately reformulate the query to a more specific query, right? And the results that they want come up. So I think the way search works fundamentally supports the kind of diversity that you're looking for, right? And gives people the kinds of things that they're looking for. And I think that's one of its great strengths.
So let's turn into a more ethical debate, this conversation. When you talk about information queries and trying to understand what information is the right one and useful for the person searching, do you have a definition of what misinformation means? Do you have categories of that? And do you have concrete criteria so that it's clear how you penalize what you might tag as misinformative or problematic result?
So you might be surprised to know that the answer is no. Okay?
Yeah, that's surprising.
But there's actually a very important point to be made here. This is something we thought about. Like, I think everyone knows that about a year and a half ago, there was a lot of problems around misinformation and hate speech and so forth that was surfacing, among other things.
Still is. It's a huge problem
in search, right? And there was a question we needed to do something because this was clearly not a good thing, right? We needed to do something. I'll tell you what we did, but before I do that, I'll tell you what we didn't do. What we didn't do is we didn't go and build some deep learning classifier, something that could identify that something was fake news or something was hate speech or anything like that, right? Because I don't believe this is possible, right? Deciding that something is fake news is actually pretty hard. It requires sort of people with expertise to go and investigate and think about the nuance and this and that. I mean, you mentioned this even in your opening about, is it propaganda? Is it, politicians can lie, but they're not really misinformation? And, there's all this nuance there. And I don't believe that we can do that kind of nuance with algorithms, at least not the ones that we have today. And it would just lead to strange biases in our results that we were just not comfortable with. So what did we do? Because we have actually made a lot of progress on this problem, right? What we did do is we doubled down on the underlying principle that's been with Google search since the beginning. I mentioned that right at the beginning, which is this idea that what we want to surface for users are relevant results from authoritative sources, right? And if we can do that, users will be happy. This is the experience all the time. Now, authoritative results aren't always important, right? If you take your iPhone and there's a problem with the iPhone, and you come to Google and you search for a solution to that problem, and you get a result from some forum with some guy who's giving you some advice on what to do, this isn't particularly authoritative, but you're not going to wait around for Apple to produce the authoritative answer to your problem. You're quite happy to try that, whatever has been suggested, because, frankly, you want to get your iPhone working as soon as possible, and the downside of an error isn't that high, right? So there are many situations where this happens, and there's no problem there. But in other cases, like a medical case, you go to a doctor and they say you're diagnosed with diabetes or heart disease or cancer. I hope nothing like that happens to any of you, but suppose it does happen, and you come to Google and you start doing these medical queries, chances are you don't want to hear advice from some guy on some forum and whatnot. You want it from authoritative sources. And that's what we decided was the problem that we had before, that there were these queries that really deserved much more authoritative treatment. There was this balance between relevance and authority, and we needed to up the authority scores, as it were, on these queries, so that for these queries, we would start surfacing results from more authoritative sources. The idea being that when you surface results from authoritative sources, the chances of misinformation are much less because authoritative sources rarely indulge in misinformation. The chances of hate speech are much less because that's not what they do. And that's been the strategy that we've adopted over the last year. And I have to say that while it's by no means a complete solution, I'm sure we can find stuff problematic still. It has made a huge difference to the kind of experience you find on search for these things.
But ain't that problematic? Or let's put it, isn't contradictory with the idea of diversity or conflictive? Because when it comes to politics, authority, it's a relative story. The examples you're bringing apply for medicine, apply for many things where you have science behind that, or where there are concrete facts that you can point to. But when it's about something as subjective as ideological positions, and it's about having a diversity of ideological political positions, then authority, it's a complicated criteria.
It is. It's not a straightforward, easy criteria, but it's, I think, an important criterion, right? So I mentioned the rater guidelines earlier, right? Yeah. Which say what is great search. One of the sections of that document talk about how raters should think about authority, right? What are the attributes of authoritative sites and so forth,
so
right?
could we try to just to use this example, try to understand what it means in that context, authoritative? So if we say we have the right-wing party making some claims, and then we have on the same issue a different party from the social movement or a leftist party, how would you define authoritative in that context? What would be...
Without knowing the specific parties involved, I would imagine that the parties themselves are going to be relatively authoritative. The news sites that cover them, the major news sites that cover them would be relatively authoritative, and we would get a diversity of opinions about this. Nothing in our RATA guidelines, for example, talks about ideological differences as folding into authority. There's nothing about being conservative or liberal or right-wing or left-wing. We have authorities on all parts of the political spectrum. The problem arises when you have people who are essentially putting out content without any sort of expertise or authority or anything like that, and that content is surfacing for very general kinds of queries, right? Now, going back to the diversity question, if someone asks a specific question,
migration politics,
seeks out that particular piece of content, we will still surface that. Right? So let me give you a concrete example that actually happened, right? One of the queries that set this whole thing off was the query, did the Holocaust occur? Right? And at the time, much to our chagrin, the top result was from a Holocaust denier that was claiming, here are the 10 reasons why it didn't happen. Now, I would submit that this is not a very authoritative result about the Holocaust, right? When we made these changes today, the top result, or at least the last time I looked, was from the US Holocaust Museum, which talked about all of this, right? The result that used to be at the top, you can still find it with a sufficiently specific query, right? And it goes back to my diversity point, right? If you want a particular result, just reformulate your query to a sufficiently specific query, and you will find it still. But for that more general query, we want to surface for our users these authoritative content, and there's nothing about being authoritative about where you are on the political spectrum per se.
So let me reformulate my question. If we would put something like, if I would enter as a search keyword, something like migration politics, would I get a first page, I think it's 19 results that
10 results.
Yeah, 10 results, yeah, sorry, that's the, if it's the search, not the news. If I would put that word, how many political different parties would I get within those 10 results? Would I get all of the parties and all their positions? Or would that be also, what criteria would overweight over that, right? There are other additional criteria apart from authoritative, I guess. Geography, well, I guess not geography. We did a study as Algorithm Watch in the German elections, and we realized that geography is a huge factor with regards to search. But we never saw something like a diversity of getting on the first page the Green Party, the Red Party, the Black and the Yellow Party, just to not give names. But we got like very specific results towards. So how does that happen?
Right. So, to be fair, we don't enforce that all parties are represented for that particular query. Right. So some number of parties will be represented. Some number of points of view will be represented. I think it's actually kind of risky to say that all parties by fiat need to be represented, or all points of view need to be represented, because that would suggest that if I say, did the Holocaust occur, not only should we have the US Holocaust Museum, but right there we should also have the Holocaust denier right there, because that's an alternate point of view. So to me, that's that position that says that we somehow identify all possible perspectives and make sure that that is represented is a straw man that I don't think really works, right? So if there are genuine differences of opinion, my guess is that are reasonable differences of opinion. My guess is that there will be content that will talk about those differences of opinion, will contrast them and so forth, right? And that's how you would find it. But having said that, remember the other part of diversity. Maybe for the query migration politics, certain viewpoints from the Green from the Black Party are not represented in there, right? But if you're interested in that, you can explicitly ask for it, and you will get it, right? So it's not as if we're removing access to these different points of view at all.
How much time do we have left? Was wondering. Can anyone give me a sign? Because I don't have a clock with me. 25 minutes, wonderful. I would like to open the last 10 minutes for Q&As, and is that fine for you?
Fine.
And for the next 10 minutes, I would like to keep this conversation from the ethical point of view to the policy/ethical point of view. You are in over 50 countries all over the world. You have your own policy, your own ethics and standards, and we're trying to get there behind there. And you also have local regulation, which might contradict your policy. And we see that particularly when we talk about countries that are autocracies and have a different understanding what information means and what takedowns are. But we also have this in democracies, right? You are having demands to take down content or delist content from different countries, and both countries are claiming global jurisdiction, meaning that you should take this type of links from everywhere around the world, which might collide with the regulation of other countries. How do you deal with that? Is there a team making the hard decisions, saying, oh, well, for Nigeria, we don't do this, but for France, we will do that? And what does it mean in the end if you do this for France? Don't the other governments, let's say Ireland or Germany, come to you and say, well, you did this for France. So what's the policy and what are the...
So let me give a two-part answer to that, right? One is a slightly general question that you didn't ask, but it's worth pointing out, and then I'll answer the specific question. The general question is, we do operate in a lot of countries across the world, and we make sure, or at least we try to make sure, to the best of our abilities, to tune the search engine for the needs of that country. So I've already mentioned language and local results. We have local raters that help us do this across the world so that local cultural feelings are appropriately represented and so on. So this is for sort of the broad range of queries. We try to make sure that it is appropriately targeted for each country so that Google feels to a greater or lesser extent like a local search engine, right, for that country. So that's sort of the broader point here. This is something we've always done since the beginning, and we continue to do that. For the most specific question, I think the strong statement to be made is we follow the law of the land in each country that we operate in. We have a very strong policy and legal team. We have policy and legal representatives in each of the countries that we operate in, either our own folks or we have representation through other partners and so forth, to understand the legal setup in each of the countries. And we absolutely follow the law of the land for each country. So for example, to give you a concrete example, in Thailand, they have a lèse majesté rule, which says that it is illegal to criticize the monarchy. And so if we are informed of a search result that criticizes the monarchy, we have to take it out of the index. Right? And
you take it for everywhere around the world?
We only take it out for Thailand, right? Because surely you wouldn't want that result taken out for Germany or for the US and so forth. So for the service in that country, we comply with the law, but we don't apply these laws, these regulations globally.
But might not be a conflict with regards, let's say, diversity. There are some countries where they don't want to have the visibility of other minorities. Let's put Turkey and the Armenian question, right? In Turkey, it is forbidden to state that there was a massacre committed to it was mass crime. Committed to the Armenians at the very beginnings of the 20th century. Doesn't that collide with the concept of authoritativity that you have by denying that there was that mass crime? I mean, it has been acknowledged by the Council of Europe, by the United Nations, and by abiding to the law of Turkey, you are colliding with your own. How do you deal with that?
So I'm not familiar with the specific laws of Turkey and what is and is not legal, but I think as a company that operates in Turkey, we have to comply by the laws of Turkey. And if the laws of Turkey say that a specific piece of content is illegal, for better or for worse, then we have to comply with that particular law. We don't have a choice on that, and we absolutely comply with that law, whether or not we like it.
But you do have a choice. You did get out of China, for instance, which was certainly, I guess, not an easy decision, right?
It was not an easy decision. And I think in all such decisions, there's a pro and a con, right? So we could decide, for example, to get out of Turkey because we don't want to, hypothetically, again, I don't know what the legal situation there is, but we could say, in the Thailand case, we can say, well, we want to be able to criticize the monarchy or not. But when we get out of the country, there's the other side of it, which is that we've stopped providing services of other sorts to all these users in that country. And that is, I think, also a significant downside for taking actions like that. So, yes, we have the option to leave, but that's not an option without real ramifications, right? And you have to make a judgment call as to what is it that you want to make.
So let's get to an even harder question. On a technical level, current digital propaganda strategies mostly rely on botnets on the one side, and exploiting online communities, and using paid content to disseminate material. Two of these aspects concern Google, bots, and paid content. And Google ran an internal investigation to determine whether Russian-linked entities used its ads or services to try to manipulate voters ahead of the US election. Is the investigation concluded, and can you share some results?
Absolutely. So, first, again, the broader point. The broader point, and I think I've made this before, is that since the inception of Google, there have been all sorts of elements out there trying to manipulate search results. We call them spammers, right? And if we didn't fight the spammers with everything that we had, search would not work for anyone. We would because spammers are motivated not by user benefit, but by their own benefit, right? And search results, you would not be using Google for anything if we let spam overrun it. And so over the last, I don't know, 20 years, but certainly 15, 20 years, we have had a significant effort on fighting spam and fighting different forms of manipulation, from link farms to paid content, to all kinds of things. I mean, it's again, the creativity of the human mind is mind-boggling when it comes to the kinds of things people try, and we fight this. Lately, there's been a lot of concern about foreign actors also trying to manipulate online platforms, whether it's search, whether it's social media, whether it's Twitter, all of these things. Within search itself, when all this became clear, we did a detailed investigation to look for evidence of search result manipulation by foreign actors, and we did not find anything, right? Maybe it is that our regular spam fighting had already taken care of it, so we never saw it for whatever reason, or maybe they didn't try, maybe it wasn't the right thing for them to do. I don't know what the reason is, but we didn't find any evidence of it on the search side.
So meaning bots, for instance, or
Bots
spammers
or
and things like that.
spammers or paid content or any of these things that try to manipulate search results, we found no evidence for it on our side. On some of the other services, they also did a more detailed analysis. Our general counsel gave evidence at the US Congress some time ago with the results of that investigation, and they did find some low levels of manipulation, which they disclosed there, but it was not very significant.
So this directly leads to my last question before I open the floor to the audience. Exposure to a specific information doesn't necessarily mean immediate influence. You have a lot of information. You're sitting on a huge data bank of information where you can really draw conclusions and understand the degree of how visibility leads to which extent, to which degree, to a change of habit, to a change of the circle of friends, to a change of consumer behavior, and many, many other things. This information, of course, you're using it for your own internal purposes. Are you trying to understand it from a more academic point of view? Are you sharing this with the scientific community? How is the possibility of having access to this information? How do you deal with all this?
So we absolutely do a lot of user studies to understand how users experience our products, where the gaps in our products are, what can we do to improve products, and so forth. And we use those to inform our product decisions and so forth. Similarly, once we launch a change, we have these reviews that happen several months later. They're called landing reviews that actually go back and look to see, are users actually using this as we thought they are? Are they getting the benefit that we thought they are? And so this kind of user research is very core to how we continue to improve the product. In the context of misinformation, I think where your question is coming from and what the effect it has on it, we haven't done this kind of analysis because, in part at least, we don't have much visibility into what users do once their search journey ends, right? Like what happens on social media, for example, and whatnot. And the effect that all of this has on people really happens from many different sources. It's what they see in search, certainly, but it's what they see in social media, it's what they see on television and radio, and what they talk about with their friends, and so forth. And we haven't done, we have no ability to do any sort of detailed analysis of the effects in any sort of controlled way to do this. Having said that, I think it's really important work to do to understand how it is that we do it, and we've been partnering and supporting, actually, various projects like the Trust Project out of Santa Clara University, and there's a media literacy project out of Stanford and the Poynter Institute and so forth that we support and partner with, and I hope there'll be good stuff that comes out of that.
Okay, two things. But this would mean, on the one side, that you are very US-centric with regards to research access of researchers on the one side, which, of course, being European, I don't like very much, because, of course,
Well, I have to say that I only mention those because I'm personally most familiar with that. It's entirely possible that they're also partnering with others in Germany. I'm sure our policy folks around might be able to address that.
An invitation. And the second thing is, of course, you might not be able to monitor all behavior, but you might be able to track, even in an anonymized way, what users are searching as a history. So you could actually you could do that study. You could at least try to understand if even in an anonymized way, try to understand what a single actor or what profiles of different types of actors are doing in the course of a day, what pages are being visited more after seeing different other pages before. You can try to draw some conclusions also about the impact that seeing something leads with regards to different... Oh, it's my mobile? 10 minutes. Perfect. Thank you very much. So yes, I understand that there might be no interest with regards to usability to perform a research like that, but seeing the light of the discussions, in the light of the discussions that we have right now about disinformation, and Google being very much in the center of attention of this type of conversation about filter bubbles and manipulation online, wouldn't it make sense to look at it and try to understand more and to bring some numbers and perhaps bring academia to this type of conversation?
This is certainly something that we should consider. Bringing academia in, of course, has questions of privacy and so forth. We wouldn't want some sort of problems of those sort to come up. And frankly, I will say that over the last year, our primary goal has been to make sure that we address the underlying problems of misinformation and hate surfacing in search. That has been where our focus has been, because that, I think, is the thing that is of highest value to us at this point.
Well, thank you very much for this. Any questions from the audience? I see some. I can almost not see. I would like to gender. This means that we have a gentleman as the very first question. If there are ladies in the room, because they usually are not here, I would like them to come up first afterwards. So first the gentleman in the first row, and then the lady behind.
Sure, thanks. My question revolves around voice becoming a new interface. You talked about discriminating results and displaying a wide variety of the results. And to maybe wrap this question up a bit quicker, if we look at Amazon and Alexa and search via voice, there are concerns that Alexa will only give you products on the Amazon platform that Amazon likes to be listed first, because you won't be able to see a whole list of products you could choose from, because you only have a sound answer, basically. So new batteries are $5.99, should I order them for you? So how do you deal with different perspectives and diversity in voice when you use a Google Assistant, for example?
So this is a great question. As we discussed earlier, the search interface today actually does give you this diversity, and you can pick. And the fear is that when you go to these voice interfaces, like on the Google Assistant, that we will somehow pick out one answer as the answer and give it to you. And in fact, today's experiences are very much like that. You say, how tall is Angela Merkel, and you'll get the one answer for it right there. It all sounds wonderful, but then you have this problem, right? My response to that is, this is a serious problem, and this is a serious issue that needs to be taken care of. This idea of giving a single answer makes sense when there is a single answer to be given, right? And in that case, it makes a lot of sense to give that answer. But if there are truly a wide variety of perspectives and so forth that should be meaningfully provided, then clearly that interface doesn't work. And it would be foolish for us to presume that we know that one answer suffices. And we'll have to come up with richer interfaces that may be some sort of a dialogue, or I don't know what they are. These have to be still invented, right? But I have every confidence that we will, if we are able to have an effective conversation around situations where there is a diversity of information, that we will have appropriate interfaces that will surface this diversity of information, rather than pretending like we know the one true answer.
Thank you very much for that question. There's one more question there behind. A second one, third, fourth. Okay, could you, since I see three more people wanting to have a question, could we try to be very concise and put them together, perhaps, so that we can first gather questions and then get the answers?
Hey, Thanks for sharing so many insights. So my question is related to coming back to that question, Google and autocratic systems. So your mission as Google is serving users finding content, but in an autocracy, there is that risk becoming an executor in distributing content for propaganda. And how would you know when that happens? So do you measure that? How would you know when instead of serving your mission that you help users finding content, you instead of that help autocrats distributing specific content, distributing propaganda? How do you measure that? How do you analyze?
Okay, let's try to collect more questions. So the question is, when you are in conflict with other country, when the conflict of the law of the country is in conflict with fundamental human rights, how to deal with that? Two more people there, one more people there. Please try to be quick. Sorry.
First, just one remark. I want to say that when you said that people can have access to what other parties think on an issue, I would say that if people don't know what to search for, they wouldn't find it. That's how we create filter bubbles. For example, for an issue, we have all the options, not just the dominant ones. For example, the environment issue of all the parties. Then we can see all the options. Otherwise, we'll just get the dominant ones. And that's how we end up with filter bubbles or searches, how to kill a Jew or things like that. Second, my question, sorry, is GDPR is approaching and 4,000 publishers yesterday sent a letter to your CEO demanding that Google is not a data controller, but only data processor. Because when being a data controller means that you will gather the data that later you will also use for profiling, personalization, and things like that. So do you have any thoughts on this data processor versus data controller?
Next question, let's try to gather.
Sure.
And then.
So my question is about a Google campus that is being planned to move into Kreuzberg at the Umspannwerk on Olauer. And the issue is that Kreuzberg doesn't want neighbors that contribute to the US government drone program. We don't want neighbors who commodify our identities. We don't want Google to move in to Kreuzberg. And so my question is, you know, we have made this very clear over the past year and a half plus. Why does Google not care that Kreuzberg does not want a campus?
Okay, thank you very much. And the last question there, and then we'll have to wrap up. Sorry that we cannot take all questions.
When customer satisfaction is central, is critical, wouldn't it be the best way to satisfy different kinds of people, to just let them choose whether they want regionalization or personalization of results?
Okay, so that question would mean, I think you got it. The last question is rather, why can people choose the main factor of the algorithm? So regionalization, rather personalization, or just choose for a different type of algorithm? Should we start with the last question and then
Sure.
back?
I mean, at some level, giving choices of a very detailed nature to users is in many ways a false choice. Users are not going to be able to select these things for many, many different things. Having said that, there are a limited set of situations where you can make these choices. So for example, you can turn safe search on or off, for example, or you can turn personalization on and off if you so desire. So there are some factors that sort of make sense that you can turn on and off, but you can't doing this sort of across the board to change things in various ways. I don't think users are going to find this particularly compelling. It'll make for a very complicated system. So that's one. With respect to the question about Google moving into the new campus, I have to admit I have no particular insight or anything on that question. I'm sure others might be in a better position to answer that. What was the other?
The question is about what happens when Google abides to law that is in conflict with fundamental human rights.
So, I mean, that's a very good question, and it's a very difficult question to answer. We've certainly taken many different positions on that. You mentioned the China example as one where we took one choice. There are other situations where we choose to follow the law and remove the content. I will say that our legal teams are very good about being as conservative as possible about what gets filtered out. So they really try to limit the amount of content that gets removed that still follows the law. The real issue is that with a lot of these countries, the third alternative is to simply not provide a service, either because we don't provide the service voluntarily, or the country puts a block on the service. We've had this happen with other Twitter being blocked or Instagram being blocked or Facebook being blocked in different countries. And so that's really the alternative you have to look at is not just that you lose those queries, but all other queries, either voluntarily or involuntarily. So I think this is a difficult question that needs to be addressed on a case-by-case basis based on the extent to which this is all happening. And there was a last question.
It's about the GDPR and why does Google doesn't want to be a data controller and rather want to be a data processor, because they would have with that less duties and.
So I have to admit that I don't consider myself an expert in understanding the subtle difference between a data controller and a data processor. I suspect some folks on policy that are around will be able to give a better answer on that.
Yes, exactly. The Google policy team is somewhere in the first line. I think you can address that question there. Well, thank you very much. I think you see there's a lot more that could be discussed, but the hour is finished. Thank you very much for the openness with which you responded to all these questions. I hope there is a follow-up somewhere in the future. Thanks, everyone, also for the good questions posed, and enjoy the next days at the Republica.